The rain had started as a drizzle, but transformed into a downpour by the time Elena Marchetti reached the steps of the Metropolitan Museum. She stood under the awning, shaking droplets from her dark hair, wondering if she should cancel. At 47, she'd learned that plans rarely survived contact with reality, and tonight felt like one of those nights where the universe was sending her a message to stay home. But she'd made a promise, and Elena kept her promises. Inside, the gala was already in full swing. The great hall glittered with Manhattan's elite, their jewelry catching the light like constellations. Elena smoothed down her emerald dress, simple, elegant, borrowed from her sister, and reminded herself that she belonged here as much as anyone. Her art restoration business might not have made her wealthy, but it had earned her respect in certain circles. "You look lost." The voice came from behind her, warm and tinged with amusement. Elena turned to find a man watching her with eyes the color of storm clouds. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a midnight blue suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, with silver threading through his dark hair that only added to his magnetism. "Not lost," she replied, lifting her chin. "Just contemplating whether to brave the crowd or make a strategic retreat." His mouth quirked into a smile. "The smart money's on retreat. These events are insufferable. I'm Marcus, by the way. Marcus Thorne." Elena's breath caught. Everyone knew Marcus Thorne, tech billionaire, venture capitalist, the man who'd revolutionized cloud computing and made his first billion before 30. Now in his early 50s, he was a fixture in the financial pages and a ghost in the social ones, rarely photographed, almost never interviewed. "Elena Marchetti," she managed, extending her hand. His grip was firm, warm, and lingered just a moment longer than necessary. "The art restorer," he said, and her surprise must have shown because he chuckled. "I do my research. Your work on the Caravaggio at the Met was remarkable. You found details that had been hidden for 400 years. They talked through the entire gala. What started as polite conversation deepened into something else entirely, a connection that felt both unexpected and inevitable. Marcus was nothing like the cold corporate titan the media portrayed. He was curious, thoughtful, surprisingly self-deprecating. He asked questions about her work with genuine interest, listening to her explanations of pigments and restoration techniques as though they were the most fascinating subjects in the world. When the event ended, neither wanted the evening to finish. "There's a diner 3 blocks from here," Marcus said. "Best coffee in the city, and they make a chocolate cake that's probably illegal in several states." Interested? Elena should have said no. She had an early morning, and this was Marcus Thorne, a man so far outside her world that they might as well have been from different planets. But something in his expression, hopeful, almost vulnerable, made her nod. They stayed in that diner until 3 in the morning, talking about everything and nothing. Marcus told her about growing up in foster care, about building his first computer from salvaged parts, about the loneliness that came with success. Elena shared her own stories, her Italian immigrant parents, her love of art, the small pleasures that made life meaningful. When they finally parted ways, Marcus took her hand again. "Can I see you tomorrow? Or today, technically? Later today?" "Yes," Elena said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. That was the beginning. Over the following months, they built a friendship that defied easy categorization. They met for coffee, for walks through Central Park, for late-night conversations that stretched until dawn. Marcus introduced her to his world: charity galas, business dinners, museum openings. But what he seemed to treasure most were the quiet moments. Sitting in her cramped studio while she worked, watching her hands bring life back to damaged canvases. Cooking dinner in his penthouse kitchen, arguing about whether pasta should be al dente or softer. Elena found herself falling into an easy intimacy with him that she'd never experienced before. With Marcus, she could be entirely herself, no pretense, no performance. He saw her, really saw her, in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. But there was a line they never crossed, an unspoken boundary that hung between them like morning mist. Elena had her reasons for that boundary, reasons she'd never shared with anyone. At 47, she carried a secret that felt increasingly absurd with each passing year. She was a virgin. Not for religious reasons or moral conviction, but because life had simply unfolded that way. In her 20s, she'd been focused on her education, on building her career. The men who'd shown interest had never sparked anything in her. Attraction without connection felt empty, and connection without attraction had left her friendly but unmoved. Then her 30s had arrived with her mother's illness. 5 years of caregiving, of hospital visits and difficult decisions, of watching the woman who'd raised her slowly fade. By the time her mother passed, Elena was 38, exhausted, and convinced that some ships had simply sailed. Her 40s had been about rebuilding her business, her life, her sense of self. She dated occasionally, but nothing had ever progressed beyond a few dinners. The longer she waited, the harder it became to imagine changing things. How did you explain to someone that you were nearly 50 and had never been intimate? The very thought made her cringe with embarrassment. But Marcus had changed something fundamental in her. For the first time, she wanted. Not just abstractly, but specifically, urgently. She wanted his hands on her skin, his mouth on hers, his body pressed against her own. She wanted to know what it felt like to be desired, to be chosen, to be consumed by passion. And more terrifyingly, she wanted it to be him. Only him. The realization came on a Tuesday evening in October. They were in his penthouse, sprawled on the couch after dinner, watching the city lights twinkle below. Marcus had his arm around her shoulders, and she was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. He was telling her about a new venture he was considering, but she barely heard the words. All she could focus on was the warmth of him, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way his fingers absently traced patterns on her shoulder.
Elena.
His voice pulled her back. You're not listening to a word I'm saying. I'm sorry, she murmured. I was just thinking. About. This was the moment. She could deflect, make a joke, keep things safe and comfortable. Or she could be brave. About us, she said quietly. Something shifted in his expression. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes searching hers. What about us? Marcus, why haven't you ever kissed me? The question hung between them, raw and vulnerable. She watched emotions flicker across his face. Surprise, longing, something that looked almost like pain. Because, he said finally, his voice rough, once I start, I won't want to stop, and I'm terrified of ruining this. You're the best thing in my life, Elena. The thought of losing you. You won't lose me, she interrupted, reaching up to cup his face. His skin was warm beneath her palm, and she felt him tremble at her touch. Marcus, I want this. I want you. He closed his eyes, leaning into her hand. You have no idea how long I've wanted to hear you say that. When he kissed her, it was nothing like she'd imagined. It was better, deeper, more consuming, filled with months of restrained desire finally unleashed. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she melted against him, matching his intensity with her own. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Marcus rested his forehead against hers. Stay tonight, he whispered. Stay with me. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment she'd been both craving and dreading. She needed to tell him, needed to explain, but the words stuck in her throat. I need to tell you something first, she managed. Okay, he pulled back slightly, concern creasing his brow. You can tell me anything. She stood up, needing distance to say this, needing to move. She walked to the window, staring out at the glittering cityscape without really seeing it. Behind her, she felt Marcus waiting, patient as always. I've never done this before, she said to her reflection in the glass. Done what? Any of it. She turned to face him, forcing herself to meet his eyes. Marcus, I'm 47 years old, and I've never been with anyone. I'm a virgin. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. She watched him process them, waiting for the disbelief, the mockery, the retreat. Instead, his expression softened into something tender. Elena, he said, standing and crossing to her. Is that what you've been worried about? It's ridiculous, I know. At my age. It's not ridiculous. He took her hands in his. Nothing about you could ever be ridiculous. But I need you to tell me. Is this what you want? Really want? Because if you're feeling pressured. I'm not, she squeezed his hands, needing him to understand. I've been waiting my whole life to feel the way I feel about you. I don't want to wait anymore. I want this. I want you. I'm just terrified I'll disappoint you. Disappoint me? He laughed softly, pulling her close. Elena, you could never disappoint me. But we don't have to do anything tonight. We can take this as slowly as you need. I don't want slow, she said, and was surprised by the firmness in her voice. I've been slow my entire life. For once, I want to be reckless. I want to be wanted. I want to know what it feels like to completely surrender to someone. His eyes darkened, and she felt the shift in his energy. Desire held carefully in check. Then let me show you, he murmured. Let me show you exactly how wanted you are. He led her to his bedroom, a space she'd glimpsed before but never entered. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, and the king-sized bed was dressed in charcoal gray linens that looked impossibly soft. Marcus turned on a lamp, casting the room in warm, golden light. We go at your pace, he said, cupping her face in his hands. If anything feels wrong, if you want to stop, you tell me. Promise me. I promise. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. His hands roamed her body, learning its curves and contours through the fabric of her dress. She responded instinctively, her own hands exploring the hard planes of his chest, the muscles of his shoulders. When he slowly unzipped her dress, letting it pool at her feet, she felt a moment of vulnerability. Standing before him in just her undergarments, acutely aware of her 47 years, of the body that wasn't magazine perfect. But the look in his eyes banished all doubt. He gazed at her as though she were priceless art, something to be cherished and revered. You're exquisite, he breathed, and she believed him. They moved to the bed, and he took his time undressing, letting her watch. His body was lean and strong, marked here and there with scars that told stories of a life fully lived. When he lay beside her, skin against skin, Elena felt something unlock inside her chest. A door she'd kept closed for decades finally opening. Tell me what you want, Marcus whispered, his lips brushing her ear. I want to feel everything, she replied. I want to know you completely. What followed was a revelation. Marcus was patient but passionate, tender but fierce, guiding her through sensations she'd only imagined. His hands and mouth explored her with devoted attention, finding places of pleasure she hadn't known existed. He taught her the language of touch, of breath, of bodies moving together in perfect synchrony. The night air turned electric. His fingers traced patterns on her skin that made her gasp and arch toward him. Every touch was deliberate, worshipful, as though he were memorizing the geography of her body. She had never imagined that intimacy could feel like this. Not just physical but emotional, as though their souls were reaching for each other. When he finally moved above her, his eyes locked with hers. Are you sure? He whispered one last time. I've never been more sure of anything, she breathed. What followed transformed them both. The world outside ceased to exist. There were no walls, no city beyond the windows, no past or future, only this moment suspended in time. They moved together, discovering a connection that went far beyond the physical. It was as though every conversation they'd ever had, every laugh they'd shared, every moment of understanding had been building toward this. When it was over, they lay tangled together, hearts racing in synchrony, both knowing that something fundamental had shifted between them. Elena expected to feel different, transformed somehow by this milestone. Instead, she just felt more herself, more complete, as though a missing piece had finally clicked into place. Are you okay? Marcus asked, brushing damp hair from her forehead. Better than okay, she replied, turning to face him. Thank you. For what? For being you. For making this perfect. He kissed her softly. Stay with me. Not just tonight, stay with me. Move in. Let's stop pretending this is just friendship when we both know it's so much more. Marcus. I love you, he said. The words simple and devastating. I've been in love with you since that first night at the Met. When you stood there looking like you were about to bolt and I just knew I had to talk to you. I've loved you through every coffee date, every late-night conversation, every moment we've shared. I'm in love with you, Elena Marchetti, and I don't want to spend another day without you in my life completely. Tears pricked her eyes. She'd spent so much of her life being careful, being cautious, protecting herself from disappointment. But lying here with Marcus, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, she realized that safety wasn't living. It was just surviving. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since that first night. I was just too scared to admit it. And now I'm still scared, she admitted. But I'm more scared of losing this, of losing you. So yes to everything. They made love again as dawn broke over the city, slower this time, savoring each touch and taste. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Elena's phone buzzed on the nightstand, a reminder about a client meeting she'd scheduled for that morning. Marcus reached over and silenced it. Call in sick, he murmured against her neck. I can't just. You can. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with those storm-gray eyes. When's the last time you took a day off? A real day, not just working from home. She tried to remember and couldn't. That's not the point. It's exactly the point. Elena, you've spent your entire life being responsible, being careful, putting everyone else's needs before your own. Take today. Stay here with me. Let me cook you breakfast. Let's spend the day in bed or on the couch. Let's be completely irresponsible together. She should say no. She had obligations, commitments, a business to run. But looking at him, at this man who saw her so completely and loved her anyway, she found herself nodding. Okay, she said, but you're making me French toast. Deal. They spent the day exactly as he'd promised. Lazy and indulgent, alternating between conversation and comfortable silence, between passion and tenderness. Marcus cooked, though his French toast was slightly burned and his coffee too strong. They watched old movies curled up on his massive couch, and he told her stories about building his company, about the risks that had paid off and the ones that hadn't. As afternoon shifted into evening, Elena realized she was happier than she could remember being in years. Maybe ever. What are you thinking about? Marcus asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her arm. How much my life has changed in 8 months, she replied. How much you've changed me. I haven't changed you. I've just loved the person you already were. That's not true, she said softly. You've made me braver, more willing to take risks, to be vulnerable. Before you, I was so careful about everything, so afraid of making mistakes or getting hurt. You've shown me that some things are worth the risk. He kissed her temple. You did that yourself. I just gave you a reason to. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment. Elena moved her essentials into Marcus's penthouse, though she kept her studio apartment. Partly for workspace, partly as a security blanket she wasn't ready to give up entirely. Marcus surprised her by setting up a restoration workspace in one of his spare rooms, complete with professional lighting and all the tools she'd mentioned needing. When did you do this? She asked, running her fingers over the new equipment. I've been planning it for months, he admitted. I was just waiting for you to be ready. They settled into a rhythm that felt both domestic and extraordinary. Marcus would work from his home office while Elena restored pieces in her new workspace, and they'd meet for lunch, for conversation, for stolen kisses that often led to more. In the evenings, they'd cook together, or he'd take her to restaurants where chefs knew him by name, or they'd simply stay in, content with each other's company. But it wasn't always easy. Elena struggled with letting someone into her carefully constructed life. She'd been independent for so long that accepting help felt unnatural, even from someone who loved her. You don't have to do everything yourself, Marcus said one evening. finding her stress cleaning the kitchen after a difficult client call. I know that. Do you? Because you act like asking for support is a sign of weakness. She stopped, leaning against the counter. It is for me. I've always had to be strong to figure things out on my own. My parents were struggling, then my mother was sick, and there was never anyone to catch me if I fell. I learned to catch myself. That's not weakness, he said gently. That's survival. But Elena, you're not surviving anymore. You're living. And that means letting people in, letting them help you, trusting that they won't let you fall. What if you do? Then I'll help you get back up and we'll try again. That's what love is. It's not about being perfect. It's about being there. Consistently, stubbornly, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She turned to face him fully. I've never had that before. Someone who stays. It terrifies me. It terrifies me too, he admitted. I've built empires, managed billions, taken risks that would make most people's hair stand on end. But nothing has ever scared me as much as the thought of losing you. Nothing has ever mattered this much. Then we'll figure it out together, she said, moving into his arms. We'll both be terrified together. And maybe that'll make it easier. Sounds like a plan. 3 months after that first night, Marcus proposed. Not with fanfare or spectacle, but on a quiet Sunday morning as they sat on his balcony, watching the city wake up. He handed her a small velvet box, and inside was a ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum. It reminded me of your dress that first night, he said. The one you wore to the Met. I saw it in a shop window 2 weeks later and bought it. Even though I had no idea if you'd ever let me give it to you. Marcus. I know it's fast, he continued. I know people will think we're crazy, but I've wasted enough of my life on things that didn't matter. I don't want to waste another second when I know exactly what I want. I want you, Elena. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to support your dreams and share mine with you. I want to build a life together, whatever that looks like. Marry me, please. Elena looked at the ring, at this man who'd somehow seen past all her defenses to the person underneath, who'd loved her through her fears and insecurities, who'd given her the courage to finally, fully live. Yes, she said, and the word came out like a prayer. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, just like everything else between them. They married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at City Hall, with just a handful of close friends as witnesses. Elena wore a simple cream dress, and Marcus couldn't stop smiling the entire day. Afterward, they flew to Florence, spending 2 weeks exploring the art and architecture Elena had loved her entire life, now sharing it with someone who loved it because she loved it. On their last night in Italy, they sat in a small trattoria in Trastevere, drinking wine and watching tourists pass by. Elena reached across the table to take Marcus's hand. Thank you, she said. For what? For not giving up on me. For waiting. For seeing something in me worth pursuing. Elena, I didn't pursue you because I saw potential or because I thought I could fix something. I pursued you because spending time with you made me feel more alive than I'd felt in years. You made me laugh, you challenged me. You showed me that there was more to life than work and success and accumulating wealth. You gave me a reason to actually live in that penthouse instead of just sleeping there between meetings. Still, she said softly, I know I wasn't easy. I'm still not easy. I'm stubborn and independent and terrible at asking for help. And I'm workaholic and controlling and have a tendency to try to solve problems by throwing money at them, he countered. We're both disasters. We're just disasters who are better together than apart. She laughed, and the sound echoed through the narrow street. When you put it that way, that's what marriage is, isn't it? Two imperfect people choosing each other every day, figuring out how to build something stronger than either of them could build alone. When did you become so wise? About 20 minutes ago. I'm improvising here. They flew home the next day, back to New York and real life and all the complications that came with merging two independent lives into one shared existence. It wasn't always smooth. They had arguments about whose family to visit for holidays, about Marcus's tendency to work 16-hour days, about Elena's reluctance to accept help from his staff. But through it all, they kept choosing each other. When Elena had panic attacks about being vulnerable, Marcus held her and reminded her that strength came in many forms. When Marcus got lost in work, forgetting to eat or sleep, Elena pulled him back, reminding him why success mattered and what he was actually working toward. Slowly, carefully, they built a life together. Elena expanded her restoration business, taking on bigger projects with the financial security that came from not having to worry about every expense. Marcus started taking weekends off, something he hadn't done in 15 years, dedicating that time to Elena and to the life they were creating. A year into their marriage, they bought a house in upstate New York. Not a mansion, despite Marcus's means, but a comfortable home with space for Elena's studio and a garden where they could escape the city. They spent weekends there working on renovation projects, hosting dinners for friends, slowly filling the rooms with memories. One evening, as they sat on their back porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight, Marcus turned to her with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's dangerous." He smiled but didn't joke. "I want to shift my focus, scale back on the business side, spend more time on philanthropy. I want to start a foundation for foster kids to give them opportunities one never had. Computer literacy, mentorship, college scholarships." "Marcus, that's wonderful. I want you to be part of it," he continued. "Not just as my wife, but as a partner. You understand what it's like to struggle, to build something from nothing. You could help with the arts programming. Make sure these kids have access to beauty and creativity, not just practical skills." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "You'd want that? Really? I can't think of anything I'd want more, except maybe convincing you to finally let me commission that portrait I've been pestering you about." She laughed through her tears. "I'm a restorer, not a painter. You're an artist. You bring dead things back to life, you see beauty where others see damage. You understand that some things are worth the patient work of healing. That's what I fell in love with, Elena. Not just you, but the way you see the world. I want to share that with kids who need to know that their past doesn't determine their future." "Then let's do it," she said. "Let's build something beautiful together." And they did. The Thorn Foundation launched 2 years after their wedding, focusing on foster care reform and arts education. Elena threw herself into the work, discovering a passion for mentorship she hadn't known she possessed. She taught workshops on art restoration, watched teenagers light up as they learned to see the world through an artist's eyes, and found a sense of purpose that complemented but didn't depend on Marcus. Through it all, their relationship deepened. The passion that had ignited that first night never dimmed, but it was joined by something richer. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and the daily choice to show up for each other. On their 5th anniversary, Marcus surprised her with a trip back to the Metropolitan Museum, to the exact spot where they'd met. The gala was long over, and they had the space to themselves, courtesy of his generous donations over the years. "5 years ago," he said, taking her hands, "I stood here and saw a woman who looked like she might bolt at any moment. I had no idea that talking to her would change my entire life." "I almost did bolt," Elena admitted. "I was so nervous, so convinced I didn't belong in that world. You belonged. You've always belonged, not because of money or status, but because you're remarkable. You're talented and kind and brave, even when you don't feel brave. You took a chance on me, on us, and it's the greatest gift I've ever received." "Marcus." "I'm not done," he smiled, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a second ring, a simple platinum band with a single line of text engraved inside. "Still the best decision I ever made." "I know we're already married," he said, "but I wanted to mark this milestone, to remind you that I would choose you again, every single day. You changed me, Elena. You taught me that life is about more than success, that vulnerability isn't weakness, that letting someone in doesn't diminish you. It completes you." She was crying now, not caring about the tears streaming down her face. "Put it on," she whispered. He slid the band onto her finger, below her engagement ring and wedding band, completing the set. Then he kissed her, and it felt like coming home. Safe and exciting all at once. Comfortable and thrilling. Everything she'd ever wanted and more than she'd dared to dream. "I love you," she said against his lips. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for taking a chance on yourself," he replied. "On us. For being brave enough to want something, even when it terrified you." They stood there in the museum, wrapped in each other, surrounded by centuries of art and beauty. Elena thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago. Careful, guarded, convinced that some chapters of life had closed. She thought about how wrong she'd been, how much she would have missed if she'd chosen safety over risk. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked. "About how glad I am that it rained that night," she said. "About how a chance meeting changed everything. About how grateful I am that you saw something in me worth pursuing." "Elena, I didn't just see something worth pursuing. I saw everything I'd been missing, everything I didn't know I needed. You gave me a life worth living, not just a life worth documenting in business journals. That's not something to be grateful for. That's something to celebrate every single day." And they did celebrate, not just that night, but in all the small moments that followed. In morning coffee on the balcony, in late-night conversations about dreams and fears, in the work they built together, in the love they chose daily. Elena learned that it was never too late to begin, never too late to want, never too late to let someone see you completely and love you anyway. She learned that virginity wasn't something to be ashamed of or defined by, that waiting didn't make her broken or strange. It just made her story different. Most importantly, she learned that taking risks on love, on vulnerability, on letting someone into the most guarded parts of yourself, was terrifying and necessary and ultimately worth it. Years later, when people asked her about her marriage, about how they made it work, Elena would smile and think about that first night, about begging Marcus to take something she'd held onto for 47 years, something she'd thought of as a burden or a failure, about how he'd taken it, yes, but he'd also taken her fears, her insecurities, her carefully constructed walls, and loved her through all of it. He'd taken her first night, yes, but more than that, he'd taken her hand and shown her that it was never too late to start living, never too late to open your heart, never too late to let yourself be loved. And in the process, he'd taken her heart too, not by force or manipulation, but by being exactly the right person at exactly the right time, by seeing her completely and loving what he saw, by making her brave enough to want something more than just survival. That was the real gift. Not the sex or the wealth or the grand gestures, but the simple, profound truth that love, real love, makes you braver than you ever imagined you could be. It makes you willing to risk everything for the possibility of something real. Elena had spent 47 years protecting herself, and in one night, one decision, one leap of faith, she'd learned that the greatest risk is never taking one at all. She'd learned that some things are worth begging for, worth fighting for, worth opening yourself up completely for. And she'd learned that sometimes, when you're brave enough to ask for what you want, you don't just get what you asked for. You get everything you never knew you needed, wrapped up in a person who sees you, really sees you, and loves you not despite your imperfections, but because of them. That was what Marcus had given her. Not just passion or security, but permission to be fully herself, to want without shame, to love without holding back. And that was worth more than any treasure, more valuable than any art she'd ever restored, more precious than all the years she'd spent waiting. It was worth everything.